And we're going online.
Okay, all set.
All right, great. Well, again, thank you very much. We have a great attendance today, and we really appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy schedule. I have a real quick demonstration that I'd like to go over, just to kind of remind everybody of the power of the reporting capabilities built into the system. Only take about 10-15 minutes, more of a refresher, but from there, I think you'll spark some creativity and some ideas for you. And then, as we do each week, we open the doors up, and we'd like to get any and all feedback and questions from you. You'll notice in your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a questions area. Please, if you can go ahead and just start entering your questions there. Dave will monitor the process, and that way we can answer any questions you have, and also it gives us guidance in terms of what is kind of information that you're looking for from us to help you develop your applications or learn more about Alpha or any and all of the above. Again, my name is DM McCormick. I'm the lead solutions engineer for Alpha, and I work with both new customers and existing customers to help them understand and enable and utilize the Alpha platform. The fun part of my job is that it continually changes and improves over time. It's amazing how just almost weekly there's new and better features, better capabilities, better integrations, third-party products. And in fact, I want to give you a heads up, in the next couple weeks we're going to be having a developer of a third-party integration. It's actually a tree control. I kind of talked about it last week. Will be joining us, and he's going to go through more of an in-depth presentation of his integration, kind of talk about how he put it together, and hopefully that will be very interesting for you. Dave will be sending out and setting up that information going forward. So again, thank you very much. Make sure to take the time to enter your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel. And as always, if you have questions before we can prepare, send it to guides@alphasoftware.com. That's GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. But what I want to do real quick was go through a quick refresher of the reporting capability. What's interesting is a lot of people, it's like come in for the mobile applications, stay for the reporting. What we find out is that a lot of people don't really understand the true and full power of the reports capability. So what I want to do is go through and show you how quickly you can develop report content that can be leveraged in your application. So before I do that, I just want to make sure, Dave, that I'm coming through loud and clear, and you're able to see my screen and everything's working okay there?
Everything is coming through.
Excellent, excellent. So this will only take about 10-15 minutes. So built into Alpha is a full-blown report editor, which will allow you to generate reports from SQL databases and functions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. But the idea behind this is that instead of having to go to a third-party product and do all the integration yourself, Alpha has taken the time to integrate these capabilities. So what I want to do is I want to create a real quick report here. So I'm in my Web Projects control panel, and for people who are new to the system, you access that by clicking, by going to, if you're in the control panel, this is the old school control panel, and then we have Web Projects. This is the Web Projects control panel, and it's built up of all the different types of files that are in your system, and then a list of the files in particular. But I'm in the Web Projects control panel, and I'm at the reports area. I'm going to go ahead and create a new report. And again, we can create letters and labels, but I'm going to create a report. Okay. Now I go into here, and I'm given a selection. Now, I'll talk a little bit more in detail, but I'm going to use SQL Data Source for right now. Traditionally, Alpha has been a database development tool. Obviously, it inherits and continues to have all of those facilities and capabilities. So you could click data source, which I'll do in a moment, for SQL and connect right into the database and report data. But also I wanted to let you know is that now with a newer release, Alpha can actually do it against a custom data source, which in this case you can actually write a little function that actually produces the data and gives it to the report. So the cool thing about that is that you're now not limited to just using a SQL data source, but also more importantly is that through that custom data source you can connect into third-party web APIs. So you're not just limited to data on your local system, and you're actually able to generate data from multiple sources and combine them all together and provide them. So it actually makes your report generation much easier because you don't have to do a bunch of jumping through hoops. So let me go ahead and show you how to do a SQL data source, and I'm going to go ahead and use the quick report. I could jump in and create a free form or a layout table report, but I want to show a quick report. So that way we can get something done very quickly. So I select there. So the first thing it's going to do is ask me what data source. And again, for people who are newer to Alpha, Alpha supports many different data sources, databases such as SQL Server, MySQL, DB2, QuickBooks, and other pieces like that. But I've predefined these sources, so I'm going to click a connection, and in this case is going against an access, but this could be equivalent to going against MySQL or SQL Server or something along those lines. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And so now that I've selected that, it actually connected to the database and shows me what's available. And I can see both the tables that are available, but also I could pick and look at views. So if you have views that have been pre-generated in your backend database, you can report against those along with actually the data. But I'm going to go ahead and make this let's say we're making a customer phone list. So I'm going to click Customers here. So then it tells me, okay, you've selected customers. Here are all the different fields that are available for my customer. And I'm going to go ahead and click all columns because I want to go ahead and bring back all the columns there. But if I wanted to, I could just limit it to a few columns to reduce the amount of data that's coming back from the database. Now, very fun, we can actually include where conditions. So I can add conditions. So maybe I want to say where the country is equal to a certain country. This could be a argument, meaning that it could be defined by, say, the person logging in. I could look at the person logging in and say, well, what country are they in? Limit the report to that country. And you could put multiple where clauses in here. Now, what's going on is behind the scenes, the system is just writing a nice little piece of SQL for you, so it's making you easy there. But it's a point and click function. You don't have to like if I wanted to just make a London report, I could click add new condition and go city is equal to London. There you go. And you'll notice here that one of the other things that's nice is that when I selected the city, it actually shows me in this drop down all the different cities that are already in the data. So it actually not only shows me the structure, but what's the data in there? Really a time saver when I want to put in information and do things like that. So I could click OK, and now it will only limit to there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that from that standpoint right now and click OK. So now I've got my data, where my data is coming from. I'm going to click Finish, and this is a quick little message that says, well, how many records to retrieve. For most databases, you can just click keep it 0, which means all records. But if you had a 1,000,000 record table, you may want to say, just give me 1,000 records. So when I'm doing my designing, I only have to, I have a subset of those records, things run faster. But in my case, I have a small data set, so I'm going to go ahead and click 0 to retrieve all records, and I click OK. So now what it's doing is it's grabbing a sample set of data. So this is my quick report editor, and basically it shows me on the left my available fields. In the middle is my selected fields. So let's say I want to just put in my company name, contact name, and phone. So I'm selecting a subset of the data that's available. And now if I click preview, you'll see there is my report. And you'll notice that I have company name, contact name, phone, and it started to do there. Not really pretty yet, but we'll show you how you can re-pretty it up from there. But I now have created a report, a quick report, and can modify it. So as you can see, it only takes a few minutes to generate reports for your users, and they're very user-friendly. So let's do a few things here. Let's first go into report settings here, and what I want to do is I want to create the title of this report to be company phone list. And I want to make this, let's say, a little bit larger. So I'm going to make that a little larger there. Then I want to go in over here and I want to set an order. So the order I want it to be in is I'm going to click on here and then I'm going to say sort by, let's say, contact name, A to Z. And again, this could be Z to A. So within this, I'm able to make little adjustments to my report. Now when I go back into my preview, You'll see now I have a company phone list here, and the contact name is now sorted in order. Now, let's say I want to do something actually a little even fancier. Let's say I want to go back into my grouping, and I want to group it by company name. So what I want to do is I want to group things by company name. So now I go into my preview, and you'll notice that it's now grouped this automatically by company name, and I could get rid of this company name column now because it doesn't make much sense here. And then within that company, if you have multiple items, it will sort them by that company name and put their information out very simply from there. And I can go to the next page and look at the next page. It looks like there's about one person per one, so nothing super exciting there. So as you can see, it's very simple for me, and I'm going to go ahead and save this report. I'm going to call this webinar, let's call it webinar underscore report. Okay, so I'm going to come back and visit the report editor in a minute, but what I want to do now is show you how fast and easy it is to include this report in your applications for your users. So we've created our report, and it's called webinar report. So I'm going to go back to the web projects control panel. I'm going to create a new component, and this is going to be a UX. I go to web components here, and I'm going to create a new component, and it's a web component. And for those that are new, Alpha has a very rich set of components. We have grids, we have UXs, which I'll show you in a moment, but we have video players, mappers, launchers, schedulers, all these kind of things that are in there. But for today, I'm going to create a UX because I want to create basically the form to show the report. So I'm going to click UX. I'm going to go ahead, and you'll notice I have a bunch of different options here. Alpha ships with templates for those things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a panel navigator. Which one do I want? Is it that one? I want to make sure I pick the right one. Let's go ahead and pick that one and see what it looks like and make sure there. Okay, so what I've done here is by selecting that, it's automatically creating a pre-made sort of formatted form. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like. So you'll notice in here, we are in our simulator, and I'm going to make this an iPad so it's a little easier to see. So you'll notice here that I have an area for content, and then down below I have different buttons. If I click a button, it takes me to a different panel card for each of those buttons. So as I walk through those there from that standpoint. So what I'd like to do here is that when I come in here, when I click this button right here, I want to display the report here. So think of it as like on the road, I can do some mobile reporting. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and go in here and call this webinar UX. And you'll notice that the way this is structured, and again, for some of you experienced ones, this may be a little redundant, but you'll notice here I've got what's called a panel navigator. Think of that as a traffic cop. It basically controls what the user is seeing. And then in here, I have a series of panel cards. One panel card, and each of those panel cards can have different content. And then you'll notice I have something down here called panel footer, and that holds those buttons that are at the bottom of the page. And the cool thing about a panel footer is that it will always stay at the bottom of the page for navigation purposes. So we have our home button and our second button here. So now what I'd like to do is right now, when you click this second button, and I'll go ahead and show you real quick, if I click this second button, it takes me to panel card number 2. But what I want to actually do is show that report in panel card number 2. So I'm going to go back into my design. I'm going to go to this button right here. I'm going to scroll down here, and actually, you know what? I'm going to actually do it a little differently. I want to go ahead and add a button on my first panel card to show that report. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my first panel card. I'm going to go to Other Controls and click Button. And I'm going to go Show Report. So basically now on my interface, you'll see I've got a little button here that says Show Report. When I click on it, doesn't do anything yet. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to go to panel card number 2, and I wanted to show that report because panel card number 2 is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on my panel, my click event for this button. I'm going to do two things. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to do a panel actions. Now, again, for people who are new to this, this is our action JavaScript builder. It is a tool for you to build behaviors and actions into your system without having to code. And as you can see, we have a very rich set of actions. We have things like mapping, importing, export, reports, which we'll show you in a moment, all these kind of things. So what I'm going to do is I want to go to my panel card. So I'm going to select panel actions. When I typed in a filter up here, it showed me this panel card here. And the action I want to do is set my active panel to be panel card number 2. So what I'm doing is by selecting from this genie the things I want it to do, it will do them for me. So I click OK. And then so now I've got this action on there, and let me go ahead and show you how this works. I click on working preview, and now when I click show report, watch what happens. It takes me to panel card number 1 or number 2. I can go back to my home and it does that. So now it's got that behavior. Now the cool thing about that is that the reality behind the scenes is that Alpha, and I click this little view JavaScript, just wrote this little piece of JavaScript for me. Now, once you get experience, you'll be able to write this JavaScript directly. But as new users and people who are not familiar with the technology, the system will help you write these JavaScript scripts so you don't have to. And actually, when you start getting into mapping, it can get fairly complex very quickly. So it's really handy to do there. Now, I've done one thing. I've navigated to panel card number 2. But what I want to actually do is show that report opening in panel number 2. So I'm going to create a new action here by clicking add new action. I'm going to click report, or I'm going to type report and filter list, and you'll notice I have open a report, label, or letter layout. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now it's giving me a genie, and this is one of the magics of Alpha, is that the genie allows me an enormous amount of flexibility over these behaviors. So the first thing it's asking me is, well, which report name do you want to run? So I'm going to click here. I'm going to select the report, and I'm going to select that report that we just generated called webinar report. Okay? So now I've pointed it to that report that we just generated here. Next thing it's doing is asking me, well, what's your initial view? One of the cool things about Alpha is that we can actually generate PDFs, or we can display the information in HTML. And I'll come back and talk about that in a moment, but I'd like to go ahead and select HTML, and I'll show you why it's really cool. And then you'll notice here then I've got a bunch of other things, like I could apply dynamic filters to it. I could change PDF options. I mean, I have a lot of control over the process of opening this report. But I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to come back to this report viewer options in a moment. But now I'm going to say what the thing is asking me is, well, okay, you want to open this report. Where do you want to open this report at? So in this case, instead of a window, I want to open it in a panel, and I want that target panel to be panel card number 2. So basically, so basically it's saying, okay, when I open this report, go ahead and open it in report 2. And I click OK. I'm going to go ahead and have that go first. So it's going to open the report and show me that report. Actually, let me do it this way. So I click Save. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now when I go into my working preview, you'll notice I have Show Report. I can click Show Report, and you'll notice, boom, my report is now in my interface. That is how quickly. I mean, it took me 15 minutes to put that together, and probably 10 of that was jabber-jawing, which is a technical term. But as you can see, I can create these report and include them in my thing. And what's great is these are full HTML reports. They render incredibly fast. You'll notice I can scroll it up and down to see my report. You'll notice also it gives me these buttons. I can actually go ahead and export this report as PDF, Excel, Word, or print as HTML. And all of that is built into the tool. So you do not have to build all of this. Now, you have complete control over there. So let me go back into design, and I'll go back to my open report letter or layout, and you'll notice that I had some control. So I can say, you know what? I really don't want them to be able to export to Excel or Word, but I do want to be able to allow them to print it or show it as PDF. So I click OK. I click Save. Now I go into my working preview, go to my report, and you'll notice now I can only do PDF or HTML built into the system here. And a couple other things here. If I go back into my report, I can go into my, open my report here, and I could put in a filter condition. So if I wanted to filter this, say that city is equal to London, I could do that. But what's great about that is, again, as I talked about earlier, I can actually feed it what's called an argument, which maybe is my region for the person who's logged into the system. Or it actually reads my geolocation when I log in, and it picks a city or a state that to present that. The other thing that's really powerful about this, which is very important, is that a lot of these things can be handled via web security. So we can actually set up web security to say whether a person can see a report or not. So this button could be only showed, say, to managers, or could be only showed to internal people versus external people. But as you can see, it only takes you a few minutes to go through and create a report, integrate that into a UX, and show that dynamically. And what's great is if I go in here and say, you know what, I really also want to show their fax number, click Save. Now when I go to my webinar, I go in my working preview, I'm not sitting there and writing hours of HTML code. I now have a report that includes my fax in a matter of seconds there. And if I want to, I can click Open the Report Editor, so I can go back into my report, click Open Report Editor. I'm given a choice of layout or freeform. Layout is where I use for HTML. So I'm going to open a copy of that report, and I'm going to call this Webinar Report 2. Okay, now you'll notice I'm in a traditional report editor environment. On the right-hand side, I've got my fields, I've got my other things here. On the left-hand side, I could come in here and say, I could modify this. So if you guys are familiar with like crystal reports or things like that, you have complete functionality of modifying your report to make it perfect. And in fact, we can embed in here HTML. We could actually link another report in here. We could add a chart in this report. We could embed another table report in here. You can do calculations and expressions. The sky's the limit in terms of what you want to do. So let me go back into my report here. Let's go back into my design here. So I have my first report here. I'm going to do something really cool. I'm going to go Menu, copy this selected control for this button. And now I'm going to go Menu, paste that control. I'm going to paste it from the clipboard, and you'll notice now I've duplicated that button, and I'm going to go over to my button. I'm going to change the name of that button to Show Report 2, and I'm going to go down to my click event, go into my Open Report, and then I'm going to say instead of Project Report, what I want to do is I want to show Project Webinar Report 2, the one I just created. Click Save. So now I save that. I go into Working Report here, close to Report 2. You'll notice I'm now showing my super company phone list. I can go back here, show report number 1. Now that's my regular one here, all in a matter of minutes. And I have complete and total control over what people see, how they see it, what the data should be in the reports. And then I have full control in the report editor to modify everything about this report, you know, the width, the sizing, the fonts, summaries, all that. It's incredible, and that's why I wanted to show you guys today. That's really my fixed demonstration for today, is that don't forget that there's this incredibly powerful report editor within Alpha, and one of the most important things about that is that once you get to know how to use the report editor, generating reports is literally a very, very short period of time. So instead of custom coding pages of data, you can now create a report that renders it in HTML so that you can have pre-data. So in this case, just to show you, this is a like a multi-data report, but there's no reason why I couldn't just make this a single record and show this as a single record and format it accordingly. So actually, sometimes we have used this to actually generate sort of data representation for the user of a single record. Instead of laying out a UX, I create a report and then just show that report in there, and it takes no time at all. It's extremely fast, and it has all the capabilities of our report editor built into it.
The single form method would probably be very good if you wanted to display, say, an invoice, for example, where it was supposed to look like one page, but it's still a report underneath the covers. You know?
Yep, exactly. And the neat thing about that too is that, for instance, in my demonstration, let me go back here. If this is a invoice, I can say, oh, I want to print a PDF of this invoice. And you click PDF, it opens up. You can send it to AirPlay or whatever the printer is to print that invoice right off the system. within here, or you can print the HTML. So yeah, that's a really great use case example, is like an invoice, or let's say a service request or a receipt or any of those kind of things. Instead of laying out, going in here and then going to this panel card and then going into my data controls and adding a whole bunch of, invoice number, amount, blah, 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 blah. Instead of doing that, I can go into my report editor, lay this report out, and then just launch that report with the data. And that's where the filtering comes into. If I go back to this real quick, is when I click and say, let's say I want to say this as show invoice, okay? In my report in here under the SQL filter, I can either pass it as an argument saying here's the invoice number, the unique ID, or I can do a SQL filter. And what's great about that is that, let's say for instance, you can just basically pick up what invoice they're looking at, and then it will do the query and generate the report for that user. So Dave, great, that's a great example of how you would use a report to simplify and speed up the generation of your application without having to lay out a full template. Plus, with that built-in print HTML, print PDF, it's great. And then you could run a little code to actually send that PDF to the user as a email also, all within this capability. And that's all because of this powerful report editor built into the system. So that kind of is my my prepared quick demonstration for today. I recommend you explore the report capability. Remember at all times, if you go to, I'm going back into I'm sorry, popping back forth, but if you go to Help, Video Finder, and then type in report, and I know my screen's very small and dense, so I apologize. There are tons of videos that show you how to create reports, bind arguments to them, embed charts in there, do summaries. I mean, there's literally 55 videos that show you how to do all this stuff. And once you get started, you're never going to go back. It's very, very simple and easy to put these reports together for your system.
Excellent. Well, we do have a few questions, not
Excellent.
A lot of questions, so by all means, if you have questions of any kind about Alpha Anywhere, do type them in, or today may be a shorter session. But we'll start with the ones we do have. They're good ones. We'll start with Dean, who asks, at the beginning when you were talking about the data sources, you said, okay, I could pull it from SQL, but I could also pull it from a function. His question is, can you report against a stored procedure, like a SQL stored procedure?
Excellent question. I want to say thank you very much. The answer is yes. If I create a new report, and I'm going to go ahead and go into my report editor here, and I find that's a common situation. So I'm going to create a new report, SQL report. I'm going to go quick report, and then I'm going to select my database here. And when I'm here, I can either pick from one of my existing views or columns, or click here for custom SQL select statement or stored procedure. And now what you can do is actually literally type in a stored procedure call and pass it arguments for that stored procedure. And there's a little explanation that talks about how to set up and how does your SQL work here. The cool thing about that is that you will be it's going to work out really good because you can hide a lot of the complexities. So instead of creating a function on the front end, you can basically prepare all that data, pass it some parameters, and then the data you need for your report will come back. And then once you get past this step, the rest of the report sort of editing process is identical because it's going to pull from that SQL stored procedure what are the fields that are returned, and then that allows you to then start building your report that's associated with that stored procedure.
Great. Great. So we have a few more that have actually come in as well. So we'll go through the list here. Here is a good one. Actually, I've got two good ones. I'm trying to decide because one of them makes more sense to ask before the other one. All right, let's see what we've got. Oh, here's a great one. One has to do with, can you add a button on a report that opens a UX or a grid or something like that? In other words, are reports, they just static, or can you add actual functionality to them?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. You can add interactivity to these. When I'm back in my report editor here, and I am in what's called our the sort of freeform or table layout. So the way to think about this is that think of it as a HTML table where you have these different cells here. And what you can do is within here, which I've done before, is I've got static text, but I can create an expression. And this expression can be basically create a URL. So you can actually dynamically generate URL data, and when they click on that URL, it can send JavaScript back to the UX to do something. So
So it could open another UX, it could generate another report, or it could do something completely random like email something.
Exactly. So on the way I would handle that is that again, this can handle any type of HTML. So I can put in here, bold or strong, hello world. So you'll notice here, I am just putting in standard HTML, and if I click OK, it doesn't show up there. You'll see, oh, it's a strike through. That's not bold, that's strike through. So therefore, I could literally put in here a button, and this is just for description, or so I can actually create an HTML button right here, and then link to it a JavaScript activity. And then in my UX right here, I can go to JavaScript functions, and I could create a action JavaScript item. Like let's say I wanted to show a map, so we'll go show map. Okay. So I create a JavaScript action here to say open a map component, and you go through this and you set that all up. Now what's great is this little, if you just run this little piece of JavaScript, dialog object run action show map, the UX itself will automatically do that. So what I would do is create your actions here, copy them, and then in your report, go into your report editor here and create a definition for a button here, button XYZ, and then on click equals, and then run that piece of JavaScript. And so now what's going to happen is that this JavaScript is going to get fired off by whatever's in here, a link or a button in this report. And then what's going to happen is in my webinar UX, this UX will trap that JavaScript function and then perform a behavior. So it could even be as sophisticated as go to a whole other panel card and show you more data. So it's extremely flexible because of the way we integrate the HTML data, and HTML renders on the screen, and then when you hit that button, it will then emit some JavaScript to go and do something. If you want to do something simpler where you just want to embed links in that HTML report, you could, and then when you click on a link, it's going to open up a new web browser window to go to that link, how it goes there. So that's how I would approach the challenge of doing what you're asking to do.
Great. Here's a quick question. And can we use a SharePoint list as a data source?
The answer is yes. That's a newer functionality, meaning it's still in beta. It hasn't been released yet. Yep, and I want to be very clear. What I'm talking about here is going to be coming out very shortly. But I'm going to go to my alpha DAO connection strings, and you'll notice I have different connection strings here. I can create a new connection string. Let's call it test connection. I build it, and you'll notice that I have Access, DB2, Excel, etc. that is in here. Well, there's a new one that's coming out that's called OData, and it doesn't show right here, but what you will do is you'll actually define an OData data source, and what OData is a standard web API that you can connect to, say, SharePoint or Oracle or SAP.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming an industry standard. And then the cool thing about that is once that connection string has been created, then what you'll be able to do is within the tool, we're just going to treat that as another data source, and so the data coming back can be used to be bound to UX, to grids, to reports, to whatever you have and want to do from then on. Again, in beta, very close to release, but I'll tell you, it's going to be really cool, and it's going to open up an enormous amount of capability for us to integrate to existing back-end systems once that is in place.
Great. So now I'm actually going to give you two questions from two different people, but they're kind of related. The first one is from Eddie, who asks, what's your recommendation for a mobile app? Should I use a list component or a report if I want to present data easily? And before you answer that, here's another one from Stacy, who asks, now, does the report, how would this work in an offline situation? Or does it work in an offline situation?
Good question. The items right here is the first question in terms of I would stick to lists to begin with, because lists give you a lot of power and functionality in terms of selection, behavior, and other things. So it's a lot more built for user interaction. We talked about adding JavaScript to the report, but that's kind of a bonus extra capability. When you're working with Alpha, you really want to start with that list component and display information via list, because the list component, when you create it, has an enormous amount of functionality. So if I go in here and let's say I just add a list component in here real quick, okay, and I go to a list component right here, and again, what's nice about the list component, and it wakes up there, is I can go to different capabilities here. Notice our new OData capability. So I can connect right to an OData data source, but I could go to SQL, I could go to a custom function right there. But the most important thing about the list capabilities is that the list capabilities gives you offline capability. So when it pulls this data back, you can store it locally from the back end. So let me go ahead and just go here. I'm going to select my customer, my connection. I'm just going to go through this real quick. Select customers. And let me go ahead and do my field list of company name, contact name, and phone. So and then, so now I'm going to click go to my list layout, add those three things here, okay? So I've built this list. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to click here. I'm going through this fast, but you'll be able to slow it down in the replay. But I wanted to show you this there. Now when I go to my third page, you'll notice I've got a list of customers in here. So I've got my customers, but the real power of this comes in the interactivity of this list, meaning when I click on these items, I can then go into the list itself, go to the list properties, and then add on-click events where I can add my action JavaScript, etc., to do behaviors. So the cool thing about this, there's two things that are powerful for it. First is that it gives you more interactivity than, say, a report. Secondly, the list is your mechanism to download and store data locally. So with that list, you now can offline your application and have this list data locally. And you're not limited to one list. You could have multiple lists. You could parent-child them. That's all doable there. And so that's kind of why I would tend towards using a list initially, and then include reports for the other pieces there. Now, in terms of offline capability, the report is an online function. So if you'll notice, if I go into my working preview, when I click show report, you'll see there's like a little, it's very fast, but it's a circle. And so it's going against the data server to create this report and bring it back. So you do have certain limitations around using reports in a disconnected fashion, whereas a list control and the UX control you won't have on that scenario. Also really important is that if you include the print report as PDF, that needs the server, because basically it goes back to the server, runs a process on the server to generate that PDF, and then delivers the PDF back to the front end to the user from there. So there are some limitations in terms of using the reporting in an offline mechanism for the user in terms of how you go. But again, all the reporting capability can be duplicated through the list and through a detailed view control, basically controls on the interface if you so choose.
Excellent. So here is the sort of a follow-up question to that, and that is, okay, let's say I am using the list and not the report because I want to work offline. How much data can I store locally for my report?
Good question. It depends on which way you go out. for a web browser environment, there are certain limitations that are set by like Safari and Google for the web browser. I think it's like 4 or 5 megs or so, I think, something
Yep,
along those lines.
usually about 5. Sometimes it's
Yeah,
actually
so
10.
it's about 5. So there are certain limitations. If you're doing pure text, usually you can kind of stay within that unless your reports are massive. But if you're including a lot of images and other things, because your report editor can include images, etc., within your reports. If you are deploying through PhoneGap, you remove a lot of those limitations from the situation. So you'll find that you're going to have you can basically use all the local storage that's on the local device. So you'll find that you're not going to have the limitations as much with PhoneGap as you would with going through a web browser deployment.
Right, because you'll
And
have
that's just the
access to
benefit of
the device's file system, so you could have, gigabytes of data stored there without any problem.
easily. Yeah, I mean, it's really going to be dependent upon how much availability is for that particular device and those kind of situations there. And depending on what kind of data you're downloading or keeping locally, if you're doing a lot of photos, yeah, you're going to run into a fair, you're going to start, because photos can be very large. But if you're doing just a lot of text, then I think you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Great. Here's a quick question from Kenneth, who asks, can I show a PDF on my iPhone? Does it go to iBooks? How does that work exactly?
That's a good question. Yes, you can. Because we basically render, one of the cool things about Alpha is that we're inherently a JavaScript, HTML, CSS tool. We generate that. So there's no reason why you can't display PDFs within a panel, and it will show within that panel and represent as a PDF for there.
Right.
So that's all buildable and usable by there from within the system. Now,
And
in terms of
the iPhone itself has the ability to, like, if you click on something that's a PDF within a browser, it can open it and browse it. So it's not.
That's correct.
That's already handled by iOS, so you don't have to do anything special for that.
Yeah. So we're going to use those native capabilities very readily within our tool.
Great. I have a couple more offline questions, but before we do that, I'm going to stick with one that has to do with reporting. And it has to do, could you do a report based on a dynamic query? For example, a date range. In other words, I want to see a report from January 3rd to January 8th, and I want to let the user decide what that date range would be.
Great point. I appreciate that. Let's see. Let me show you how you would do that. Is that when you're creating a report, let me go ahead and go into create new report. Let's say I'm going to use a SQL data source. I'm going to go against my connection here, and I'm going to pick, let's say, orders, because I believe that orders has date information. Yep, you'll notice order date right here. So I'm going to select different things. So I'm looking at the orders table within the Northwind's database from that standpoint here. So I can say order, so I can bring in my date fields right here. Now, I could go ahead and go in here and say when order date is after the date, 1/1/2015, but that would be hard coding into it. So what we can do is we can create what's called an argument. And what an argument is think of it as a variable for this particular report. So I can click define arguments, and I can add an argument and call it start date, and I can say it's of type date. And now I can add a second one that can say end date, subtype date. Okay, so these are two arguments, and the idea is that I will pass this information in when I run this report. So I'm going to click OK. So now you'll notice I have these two arguments, and I could set a default value for those if I so choose. So now I can go to my where clause, and I can add a new condition, and I can say when start, let's say order date is on or after the date. Oh, I have to do time. I'm sorry. These have to be time ones, so bear with me. They're not date ones, so I'll just go to time and set that to be time. It's because the underlying data structure of it, it understands what it needs on that. But I'm going to go to where, I'm going to add a new connection. I'm going to say where order date is on or after the date, start date. Okay, so the cool thing about this is this where condition now is variable. It's whatever I pass into that start date. And I can say when order date is on or before the date, end date. Okay, so now I have the order, the only ones that will be returned here is when I have an order date that's greater than that date, start date I give it, and the end date there. So now I've set that up there. So I've got my where condition built into it. So now I've set up my report, and it's expecting these arguments, okay? So I'm gonna, and notice I can do some tests here, and let's say 1/1/2000, and then let's go 12/31/2015. And it's giving me some, so now I can put in here, and I'll create that, and let's do a preview. And I'm not feeding it the right dates there. I'll have to go back and look at what the dates are there.
Right.
But I
If
can
you're
go ahead and
using
save this.
Northwinds, then probably the database is from the 90s. So if you did something,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could.
that's
God knows how long those
that's
are.
the issue with
Those long
using that
there.
old database. Yeah.
But I've got this new report in here called date range, called date. Okay, so I've got this date range. Now I can go back into my, and I'm going to go ahead and take this show invoice here, and I'm going to copy this selected, and I'm going to paste a button here. So I'm recreating that button just to save me some time. And I'm going to show date range. Okay. Now I go into my click event. I want to alter that because what I'm going to do is when I do this open a report, I don't want to open webinar report 2. I want to put in my date range. Okay. Now notice something new. When I selected that report, it's asking me, hey, this report, it has arguments. It's looking for these arguments from you. And so now what I can do is I can set what the arguments are. And I can set it 2 ways. Let me go ahead and cancel and start back here. Let me go on and put 2 text boxes here. And I'm going to go start date, end date. Okay? So what I'm doing is altering my first page to add 2 data entry things. And I'm going to call this a time, and the end date, I'm going to make that a time 1 also. Bear with me. Okay? And what I want to do is I want to show a date time picker. And you'll notice this is all built into this, and I don't have to do it. So now what I can do is when I'm in the report here, I can pick my date and time using selectors. This is all built into it. Notice it has an iOS 7 look and feel. That's because of my structure there. So actually, let me do this so this looks a little nicer. I'm going to go up and say the width of this thing is 50%, so it displays a little nicer there. 50%. Okay, so now I've got my start and my end date, and I can set the defaults for this, etc. I'm going to go back into my button that runs that report, and I'm going to click Go. I'm going to go into Open a Report Label or Letter Layout. I'm going to go ahead and select the report that we just built, date range. And again, I'm back to where we are. We have an end date and start date. So now what I can do is I could actually go in here, and I could just go ahead and say this is 1/1/2000 or 1900, and put it in as a fixed amount. Kind of interesting, but not very exciting. Or I can insert the field and put in my start date field. So you'll notice it's got little curly brackets. So what it's going to do is it's going to take whatever date is in this start date and feed that to the report argument start date. Same thing I'm going to do with end date. I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to select end date. So now what it's going to do is take whatever's in end date, pass it to this report with that. So now I can pass those as filters. And a gentleman asked me, or I believe a gentleman asked me a few minutes ago about stored procedures. Well, if this report is generated off a stored procedure, I could feed it all the different stored procedure arguments from data that's in the user interface or session variables, etc., to then tell it for this stored procedure, generate XYZ data and return it back to my report from there. So now, and this won't work because my report, well, let's see. Let's get crazy. So let's go ahead and run this. And I'm not sure if this is going to work, guys, so bear with me. But I'm going to go back here, and I want to go, let's say, I'm going to actually type it in as 1/1/1990, and then go to today. Okay? And then I'm going to click Show Date Range, and voila, it did my report. And let's double check here. Yep, you'll see notice the dates are in there. So it's looking like 1994. So let me go back to my thing here, and let's go 1/1/1994 and go to, like, say 2/1/1994, show the date range now, and no records performed. So I must be off there. Let's say it's 12/31/1994 and run the rotate range. There we go.
Yep.
As you notice, it's dynamically feeding these two values through arguments to the report and then filtering this report accordingly. And you notice there's a fair amount of stuff here, and then you can set it up from there. So that's how you go through and create a report that's built on parameters both from the user interface, but there's nothing to say this can't be web security values. It can't be session variables that are set by the user when they log in. It could be a function call to a third-party service and then get that information and then pass that information as an argument to your report. And all of that is built into the system, very easy to do and straightforward. But you'll notice I didn't write one piece of code when I did this whole thing. I created the report via point and click. I then created the button versus point and click. I created the arguments as point and click and select some values. And then the actual running of the report, you'll notice I didn't write any JavaScript. All I did was in my report action JavaScript here, I basically told it that pointed this to inserted a field on my user interface to point it to where the source of that data was. And also when I created, if you'll notice too, when I created these date selectors, I said it was type of time. It could be date, numeric, etc. But down here, I actually said open or use a date time picker, and that's when I ran it. It took care of presenting this whole interface for me, and it's not showing time, but it has the ability to show time and things like that. So again, no coding, simple to generate, arguments, reports, data sources, stored procedures, and that's why that's kind of the reporting is a hidden gem that I always like to remind people of the incredible capabilities built into the tool.
Wonderful. Just a quick question about panels in general. How many panels can you have, and is there a limit?
There's no limit. I mean, obviously, the more things you have in there, the slower, because you have more objects in there. They're actually very lightweight. They're basically just fancy div tags inside the system. But what you can do, which is powerful, is that you can create as many panel cards as you want, but you'll notice something. When I ran each of these reports, I kept using panel card number 2. So instead of creating a panel card for every different report I wanted to, I basically said open up this data in this panel card. So there's techniques within the solution so you can keep your panel cards to a minimum, and then at the same time though have the benefit of being able to reuse that, so you simplify the number of panels that are actually in yours. And it's kind of a judgment call. The panels are kind of nice because you can define what they are, give them names, and kind of have that scenario. The downside is you're going to find out that as you get larger and larger, your interface may be becoming a little more confusing than what was there before. So there's no real limitation that I'm aware of in terms of number of panels, but try to keep them to a minimum and try to reuse as much as possible to keep your overall structure simple.
Great. Here's a question that we could do an entire webinar on, but since we only have about 5 minutes, maybe you could just sort of list out the high level, and here it is. Question is, can you explain the offline data capabilities, specifically how it works with PhoneGap, the size limitations in the data set, and if you're going to use a lookup across several forms, is the data downloaded and synchronized multiple times?
Good question. Okay, so first and foremost, Alpha is, with the the latest release, is built with offline built into its DNA. And the primary component for offline is the list component. It allows you to basically point to a backend data source, and it will automatically pull that data and store it locally as JSON. You don't deal with it, but underneath the covers. Now, what's cool about this is that you can actually have multiple lists in your user interface. So I could create multiple lists here, and then I could do two things. One is I could have um, a not a chain, but think of it as a parent-child relationship between lists. So let's say list has like orders, and then there's order line items. Well, the system has built into it the ability for you to pull a list of orders, and then it will automatically pull the line items that are associated with that and store all that data locally. And therefore, if you edit anything at either level, it'll allow you to do that. And you can also pull in other lists of data that's stored locally that could be referenced by other lists through what are called lookups. There's also another alternative, is that because we are really built on JavaScript, you can create what's called a JavaScript local storage object. And therefore, you don't necessarily have to create a list all the time. Sometimes you'll want to just, like, let's say you have a static piece of data. Let's say it's a list of stores. And that list of stores changes maybe once every 6 months. Well, what you can do is actually encapsulate that list of stores as a JavaScript file and then download that with your app, so it's kind of local data already pre-built into your app. And then it has the ability to check and see if that file is up to date and do a new download, etc., if you need in the future. So there's different mechanisms for managing that local data. Your first and foremost step is to do it with the list, because it handles everything for you. But if you run into any limitations, you can also create your own JavaScript files to include. So like when you're creating this app, you can say include this JavaScript file, and that JavaScript file will automatically be downloaded on the local machine, so it's available whether you're online or offline. And also within that, so that's one capability that's within there. Now, the beauty of that too is that since it's local, there is no round trip back to the server, so things happen lightning fast. In fact, I was just working on a project this week, and we realized that we wanted to have certain data local, and we found that the user interface sped up an order of magnitude because every time they clicked on something, they didn't have to make a call back to the server. I had that data locally. And as you get more comfortable with it, it's very easy to do it. You can actually generate that data on the fly, put it into what's called JavaScript local storage, and then from then on reference that, or there's many different techniques that are associated with it. And as David said, we could do a whole multi-series session on how to handle these things now. Now, in terms of data limitations, as we talked about before, is that if you're deploying this application in a web browser, then you're in a situation where there's about 5 megs of space you have for all that local data. But if you use our built-in capability to deploy it as PhoneGap, you now have the ability to use as much data as that local. So you could get it. You could put a gig of data down on the local mobile app, depending if the user has that much data available. But you don't have the limitations of the web browser, because they didn't want to have web. I think they just realized that if everybody put a gig down on their web browser apps, it wouldn't be a very wonderful thing for people in terms of memory usage.
That would be bad. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. It'd be a lot of gnashing of teeth. But with PhoneGap, you're not limited to that, and it allows you to bring that information down. In fact, you can bring down local image files. You'll notice here you have, where is it on here? Additional files required. So I could go in here, and let's say I'm going to go for Android. I can go to this, I'm going to generate the asset files, and then, I have to select my initial UX component. Let's just call it that for there. Okay, and then I can do additional, and I can say store list.js. And in that could just be a JavaScript object. So a lot of flexibilities on how you bring down data to your local system from there. And we will be talking about more of these in the future, the best practices, how people use it, etc. But that's a high level. I hope it gives you a little information. One thing I would like to suggest is right down here when you're in the PhoneGap, let me go ahead here. When you go to PhoneGap, down here you'll see Open Alpha Anywhere PhoneGap documentation. If you click this, it'll open up a PDF, and that PDF has incredibly, it's an extremely well-written document by Bob Moore. And I'll tell you, it really goes into a lot of these issues and teaches you step-by-step how to create a PhoneGap application, what are the variables and the other pieces there. The other thing I like to show people is that when you're in your list control, where is it? Winner, there's a wonderful document um, that goes into how to use. Let's go to my list properties. Let's say persist. Let's see if it's down here. Bear with me. There is a great document that goes through how to create local data, and let me. I don't have that up right now, but there's a wonderful set of documentation that was put together by Selwyn that goes through and talks about all the different ways you can handle mobile disconnected data when using a list. And it goes into detail about all the APIs, all the ways and methods from there. And I apologize I don't have that for you. I'll have that for next week so we can show everybody what that is from there. But I'll tell you, it's amazing what you're able to do with the disconnected. And all the hooks are in there to be able to do that within our system. So, I mean, I think within the 4 or 5 minutes we had left, that's the best we can do today.
That's all we've got, and we are at the end of our time. So I apologize for the questions we didn't get to. By all means, send them into guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com, and I will make sure that your questions are forwarded to the appropriate people so we can get answers for you. And I want to thank everyone who attended today. Thank you, Dion, for presenting, as always.
Thank you. Great questions this week. Really want to say thank you to everybody.
Yeah, it was a very good session, guys. Yeah, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Take care and goodbye.